I'm Amanda,
And I'm Cara.
and welcome to the Historical Society podcast. What was that?
I was thinking about how it's actually hard to say historical.
I know, it is.
Historical.
Historical.
Historical. So that I was like,
Yes. So,
um,
we want to welcome you to our first ever special.
Devil.
Our first ever special.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween special. And so we want to let you know in advance that Kara and I are both tired, but Kara more so than I because,
More so than I.
yes, because she woke up at 4 a.m. and traveled to Seattle, played a rehearsal with the symphony, and yeah, it's been a long day for Kara. I
Now I'm
didn't
tired.
have to wake up until 8. I have also played a rehearsal and a concert, but still, Kara had it
Yeah,
worse. Kara had it worse than I did. So Kara might yawn here and there, and
per usual.
yeah. But it won't be it won't be all my fault from boredom. I won't have caused
No.
boredom.
But I literally feel like I am just like
Hanging up.
barely awake.
Yeah.
Bum here.
Yes, you're here.
So let's start with Halloween jokes.
Okay, so I convinced Kara to
Number
let me do
one.
this
Yeah, we're doing it because Amanda wanted to do it.
because I'm corny.
Okay.
Okay.
What's a vampire's favorite Halloween candy?
What?
A sucker.
Oh! Ho, ho,
Your
ho.
turn.
What is a vampire's favorite fruit?
Don't know.
Nectarines. Ho, ho, ho. Okay.
Okay.
All right, we're going to move on now. Okay, so the thing we decided to focus on for this special, because it's scary and it is Halloween, but it's also, I think, it's a really interesting yet terrifying historical event, the Salem Witch Trials.
Okay.
And we're just going to go into them. I wanted to say, though,
Well, go ahead. Yeah.
I got to go to Salem. I didn't get to go to all the cool museums, but I did get to stand in front of the Hocus Pocus house and get my picture taken with my friends, Jason and Brett. So
Good.
I got to hold a broom and it was fun. Yay.
I didn't go.
I know.
I wasn't.
I know. You were there in spirit.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're gonna read the story briefly, right?
Yeah, it's like a condensed
Enough.
version of the story.
Okay.
All
All
right,
right.
so
Let's
here we
get
go.
started.
It was a dark and stormy night. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, start over. All right.
It should be.
Yeah. It was It was the spring of 1692. The winter was a brutal one. The minister in Salem village was still relatively new, having been installed not yet 3 years earlier in summer of 1689. His name was the Reverend Samuel Parris.
In Reverend Parris's house, the parsonage of the Salem Village Church, his daughter Elizabeth, aged 11, and her cousin Abigail Williams, aged 9, began to exhibit strange and unusual behavior.
Then, other Salem village youth started to exhibit these strange behaviors as well. Elizabeth Hubbard, age 17, Ann Putnam, age 12.
They were sometimes screaming, yelling, barking like dogs, crawling under furniture, babbling nonsense, convulsing, and contorting in strange and dramatic ways.
For weeks these things continued. The Reverend Parris tried praying and fasting, but to no avail. The Parris' enslaved servant Tituba, at the behest of neighbor Mary Sibley, had prepared a witch cake for the children to eat, containing the children's own urine, but this did not work either. Reverend Parris is furious at Tituba for making the witch cake and beats her, calling the act blasphemy.
Finally, the town doctor, William Griggs, examined them and concluded no medical condition was causing their afflictions, deeming them under the evil hand of witchcraft. Now the hunt for witches was underway.
Likely encouraged and pressured by the Reverend Parris and Thomas Putnam, among other adults, some of the children said 3 women had caused them harm and bewitched them. Tituba, the enslaved woman, Sarah Good, a poor beggar, and Sarah Osborne, an ailing and fearful woman.
Village leaders Thomas Putnam, Edward Putnam, Joseph Hutchinson, and Thomas Preston filed a complaint on February 29th, 1692, on behalf of the 4 young women, which led to the arrest of Tituba, Good, and Osborne.
These women were then brought before 2 magistrates, the judge Jonathan Corwin and John Hawthorne, to be questioned. Their accusers arrived in the courtroom as well, screaming and writhing and contorting themselves as though under a witch's spell.
Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne denied their guilt, but Tituba ended up confessing, saying the devil made her do it. Probably seeking to save herself from certain conviction, she acted as an informant and pointed her finger at Good and Osborne, saying they were definitely witches.
As the hysteria spread throughout the community, more and more people were accused of witchcraft. Spreading not just in Salem, but around the surrounding counties, the cases were overwhelming the courts. In response, the governor of Massachusetts, William Phips, ordered the establishment of a special court of oyer and terminer on witchcraft cases for the surrounding counties.
The new court handed down its first conviction on June 2nd, 1692. Bridget Bishop was then hanged 8 days later on what would become known as Gallows Hill in Salem town. Sarah Osborne died in jail on May 10th, 92. Sorry, my eyes are so blurry.
It's okay. 5 more people were hanged that July, including Sarah Good. Sarah Good's newborn child also died from the poor conditions in the jail. 5 more people were executed in August and 8 more in September. In addition, 7 other accused witches died in jail, while the elderly man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death by stones after he refused to enter a plea at his arraignment.
After many months of hysteria and many more accusations of witchcraft, the governor of Massachusetts, whose own wife was accused, dissolved the court of oyer and terminer and later exonerated those in jail by May of 1693. Eventually and thankfully, support for the trials had shifted, making it easier for the governor to end the trials.
All in all, between 144 and 185 people, men, women, and children, have been accused of witchcraft, and 20 people have been executed, while another 7 dying in jail. So it's a horrible story.
It is.
Yeah, I mean the level. I feel like it when I read it. I feel like I feel this like feeling in my body, like this almost this. It's like this fear, this like anxiety, because it's like it's creepy, but it's all self-inflicted basically by the community onto other community members. So it's just
Yep.
wow. So we're gonna look at the backstory. Any information that maybe helps shed further light onto Salem, onto why this happened, onto what was happening in this village, what was happening in this time frame. So the first thing I'll read about is basically witch hunts in general. And so witch hunts began in Europe sometime between the 1300 and 1330.
So they were a real thing.
Yeah, they were a real thing. And they didn't end until the 1700s. And 75%...
And they were legit looking for witches.
They were looking for...
Like the supernatural.
The supernatural witches. Evil witches, yeah. So this was like a thing happening in Europe. And obviously it was spread over here. The 75% of the witch hunts, though, took place in Western Germany. What was then called the Low Countries. Those countries are currently Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Also Switzerland, Northern Italy, and France. So 75% of the witch hunts were in those areas. Mm-hmm. It's thought that around 110,000 people were tried for witchcraft, and somewhere between 40,000 and 60,000 were executed. And one other little weird thing that came from this time frame, in 1486, somebody, I didn't even write down who, somebody wrote a book with a Latin title, Malleus Maleficarum. I don't know if I said that right, but it translates out into the witch's hammer. And it was literally a manual for witch hunters, like how to find the witches.
Wow.
It's just so absurd to me. It's nuts. Okay, so this was, in that time frame, this was not an uncommon thing to have heard of. To have, that there have witch hunts were happening back in the 1300s and then up until, so we're coming towards the end of that time frame. But yeah, so this is a weird phenomenon that happened. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to talk about the next paragraph there? Do you want to do the Salem towns? Or you want me to keep reading?
What do you mean the Salem towns?
So, okay. So,
How about you do it? Because I don't know. I don't know where you're at.
okay. So, Salem, to give a little bit of a back information, a backstory on the town itself. Salem was actually divided into two towns. There was Salem Village, which is where most of the people who we've just read about, those were all what do you call it? Community members of Salem Village. And then there was Salem Town. Salem Town sat on the port of Massachusetts Bay, and it was where more of the wealthier members of that area lived. So kind of like the merchant class and people who were, had more wealth. They were living in Salem Town. And then like roughly 7 to 10 miles away was Salem Village. And there were about roughly 500 people who lived there. And it was more of the farming class. So poor for sure. And that's the difference there. Yeah. And at some point, Salem Village wanted to have more independence from Salem Town. And that could have I'll talk about that here in a minute. Will I? Yeah, I'll just keep reading about this. Okay, so there was this feud that happened, basically, between two families in Salem Village. There was the Porter family and the Putnam family. And from what I know about the Putnam family, and one of the daughters, we heard, what was her name? She was one of the four, Anne Putnam, age 12. So she's the daughter of Thomas Putnam. And that's the Putnam family who's feuding with this other family, last name Porter. And the part of their feud happened prior, where apparently there was a dam on the Porter land that broke and flooded the land of the Putnams. Kara's, are you fading? She's like, I don't need to know this. But anyway, so there was basically bad blood between these two families. The other thing about these families, the Porters, they were more connected to that wealthier class of people in Salem Town. And they wanted to keep that channel there. They wanted to have that connection. And it seems like from reading about it that they also maybe weren't like super, super like extreme fundamentalist Puritans. Maybe they were still religious. Obviously, they went to the church, that same church that the Putnams went to. But it seems, reading this, that maybe the Putnams were more like the staunch Puritans. Everything's very strict. And so, yeah. So there's this kind of weird feud there as well. And the dam failure, the Putnams had sued the Porters as well. So there was definitely like some serious bad blood there.
Serious damn blood.
Serious damn blood. That's right. Okay. There's also this backstory. So when the church in Salem Village had an opening for a new minister, the Putnam family wanted a very fundamentalist, one might dare say authoritarian leader. And their choice was the Reverend Samuel Parris. And once Parris was installed as the new pastor, a division kind of began to happen in the church. Part of it was apparently his style of preaching was very bombastic, very kind of maybe aggressive, and very like strict. So very like Orthodox Puritan theology. So very, very strict theology. And he also made it difficult for himself because he negotiated higher wages for himself and also ownership of the parsonage, which for some members of the congregation, they frowned upon that. So there was this kind of division that was happening there, a little bit of a feud, a rift in the church itself at Salem Village. And then the last thing that's happening kind of during this time frame. So I read that the winter prior to this, so whether it's I don't know if it was the winter of 1691 or if it was the winter of the spring of 1692, that whole season apparently was very brutal for the area. And lastly, the other thing that's happening during this time frame, the French and English are fighting a war in Maine. And so this area, I think, it suffers some of the effects of having that war so close to Salem. So those are kind of like the things, the backstory that I never knew any of that information when I heard this story. I didn't know there were all these other little rifts and conflicts and feuds and difficulties surrounding this town. So that's kind of like the backstory of, and just the backstory of witch hunts in general. Okay. We were going to briefly focus on a few of the victims of the Salem Witch Trials. We're not going to technically celebrate women this time. We're just going to kind of highlight some of the women who were victims. So I'll ring a bell for them. Okay. A bell in remembrance. Okay. So the first one we've already talked about was Sarah Good. She, and what I'm hoping that people will hear are things that would cause other people to judge them and maybe not like them or whatever. So this first example, Sarah Good, is an example of that. So after 2 unsuccessful marriages to Daniel Poole, who died leaving Sarah with debts, and William Good, a laborer who never had enough work and so was not able to care for his family financially, Sarah was rendered homeless in Salem Village. Known as a pipe-smoking, muttering beggar, Good went door to door with her 4-year-old daughter Dorothy in tow. Just months before the witch hysteria took hold, Sarah had a second child, a daughter named Mercy. And so here's someone who smokes, begs, is poor, maybe considered a nuisance, and so easy target for the witch hunt hysteria. Now, the second person we talked about already, Sarah Osborne, she was known for being, she was ill and fearful woman in her late 40s, possibly suffering from depression, who was an outcast and subject of gossip partly because of her second husband had formerly been her indentured servant. As if this were not enough, it was suspected that they had lived as husband and wife prior to marriage. This was a scandal. And I took these writings from, I believe, the Salem Witch Museum.
How do you live together as husband and wife prior to marriage?
I think we know what that means.
But you live together, but not as husband and wife because you're not married.
Well, I think it's implying that they had marital relations as if they were husband and wife.
They
had the sexual relations. That's what that means. And they lived together.
You can't be husband and wife unless you're married.
I know, but you're pretending you are, but you're not, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Living in sin.
They were living in sin. That's what they're seen as. Yeah. So this is another woman who does not fit the Puritan lifestyle. Was apparently depressed and had scandal. Just scandal. Okay.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. All right. So we go to Bridget Bishop. She was the first person to be hanged. She was elderly, poor, and argumentative, and a widow. And when her trial came up, 10 people spoke as witnesses against her. I think that's just shocking to me. 10 people. And she was accused of bewitching 5 young women. It's just shocking. All right. So those 3 women are examples of how it seems like, and these were some of the first 3 that were targeted, that clearly they were going after these easy targets, people who maybe, it was almost like I was thinking like confirmational bias, like the adults would be like, oh, we don't like these people anyway for all these reasons, and then they're accused of witchcraft, and they're like, of course they're witches. That's why we didn't like them.
Fear mongering. The other is dangerous. The other is to be feared.
Right. Yeah.
You don't understand something or someone.
Right. All right, so the last woman we're going to highlight is Rebecca Nurse, and this one doesn't fit that same mold. So she was a 71-year-old grandmother of 8, and she was ill and frail. She went and so she was accused by these young women of being a witch, and I think they said that her specter, her ghost, appeared to them somehow, and they were utilizing in these early trials the evidence of spectral what was it called, Kara? Spectral appearance or spectral
Spectral evidence?
evidence? Yeah. And so these young girls said that these ghosts of these women would appear to them, or men. There are a couple men who were executed as well. Anyway, so this poor grandmother, ill and frail, we read that she also had to go undergo a witch's examination, and I don't know if this happened to every woman, but basically it sounds like they like made her stand there naked and like went over every inch of her body looking for a quote witch's mark. And so this poor woman, she was clearly innocent. Obviously, all these women are innocent and men, and she ends up, her children petition for her release. They petitioned the governor. The judge at first decides that she's innocent. But then because community members freak out about it, the children just like freak out. They do all this bewitching stuff. Then the judge reverses his decision and then has her hanged. It's just nuts. Like her story is like one of the, like it was just nuts. Okay.
More tragic ones.
Yeah. And then lastly, whatever happened to Tituba? Right? And so people
don't even know who Tituba is at this moment.
we talked about her. Remember? We talked about her in the story.
Briefly.
Yeah, so Tituba was the enslaved servant of the Reverend Samuel Parris. And, you know, we read that some people think she was Native American. Some people think she was African. Some people think, I mean, she was, I guess, purchased, this is a terrible word, purchased in Barbados, I believe, when Samuel Parris was living there working as a businessman. And so I looked up what happened to her. So apparently she spent 13 months in a Boston jail after her trial on May 9th, 1693. Then Samuel Parris, the upstanding Christian Samuel Parris, refused to pay Tituba's jail fees. So she was sold to another English settler. And there's nothing after that. We don't know what happened to her. So awful. Really, really, really terrible. I mean, wow. So Tituba is also an example of marginalized. They're going after people who are marginalized. So Tituba is in the weakest position of anybody there. A woman of color, an indigenous woman, or I mean, and also just a slave, right? So she is the least standing, and she's one of the very first women accused as well. Thankfully, she's alive. She lived, but no one knows what happened to her. And I mean, she's also living as a slave, so it's really terrible. Okay, we're going to then talk about possible reasons why and how this terrible real life story happened. And the first one, this was sort of a kind of an interesting thing. So the initial behaviors by these young girls, some people wonder if it's possible there's a medical reason for it. If maybe it wasn't initially just a play, just whatever, that it may have been caused by something like a natural medical issue. So some people wonder if the rye crop had a fungus in it. And so apparently the rye was a big crop in Salem at this time. And there's a particular type of fungus called ergot, which, if ingested, can cause a lot of the same symptoms that the girls were experiencing. And so, and also interestingly, it's a hallucinogenic, and it's the LSD is a derivative of ergot. So that's kind of the idea. So some of the symptoms from if you ingest ergot: vomiting, convulsing, hallucinations, choking, the feeling of something crawling in your skin. So it's actually very similar to what those two young girls first experienced. So it's possible. It could have been that. Who knows? All right. So another reason why this terrible story happened: religious zealotry. People losing their ever-loving minds.
Did you talk about the kids? I mean, people have speculated. Obviously, they ended up deducing that it was witchcraft. Right. But they talked about, were these kids like being just kids? Were they just playing around, being silly, like pretending to convulse?
Right.
Or was it epilepsy? Or was it, yeah, there were several things that they talked about. Um, so could it have been like a genetic condition or an actual medical condition? Or the thing you said about rye?
Right. Well, I mean, I think
Or were they being kids?
right. That's a possibility. But I think initially, if it happened to be a medical issue, most likely it wasn't a medical issue for everybody. It became like a prank.
Right.
It became like a hysteria or something where
Right.
kids then all over said, or, adults, I've been bewitched. And it wasn't a medical reason at that point.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So religious zealotry was our next thing. So logic, critical thinking fly out the window. Because it's a faith issue, it can feel like anything is believable, even the craziest stuff. And do I talk about? Okay, yeah, I talk about this. I was going to say lack of knowledge, but religious zealotry. I mean, I feel like I have a little experience with that, just because of some of the weird. Like, I came from a very fundamentalist background, charismatic background, and like I had that weird thing happen with me and that camp counselor who was like convinced there was a demon in our cabin, and we had to like pray all night about it. But it was terrifying, and I don't. She was not.
Did you ever find it?
No, it was nuts. It was just. It felt very like hysterical. I think
Was it
that's.
Tituba?
It wasn't Tituba, but I kind of understand this. Like when there's someone in a position of authority and they're like something terrible is happening. There's a demon in the corner, and you like are young 11-year-olds in a cabin in the middle of the night. You get freaked out, and you're like,
Yeah.
is
Just
there a
like
demon
what
in the
happened.
cabin?
That's what happened during this time. Everyone got freaked out.
Yeah.
Must be what it is.
Yeah.
Witches are to be feared. Yeah.
Yeah,
We don't
so-
want to be bewitched. We don't want to be demonized, or we don't want to become demons.
Right. And so I feel like I've sort of had a taste of this religious zealotry thing. It's like, ugh. Wow. Okay.
Yep. Which leads us into the next one, hysteria.
Yeah. Things get out of control.
People
Fear,
start to behave,
terror.
kind of act out, go with the flow,
Right. Yeah.
buy into the hype.
Right. And then the next one we listed was just a lack of knowledge. And so obviously this is happening at a time when scientific advancement, even just the scientific way of thinking, the scientific method and the way of analyzing things, not available. And even medical advances. So many things have yet to even happen. So you're looking at people who have none of that at their disposal. And so
I mean,
superstition, yeah.
Have we talked about yet why when people are, what did they call it? That's what the remind me the word the evidence, factual evidence was
Yeah.
when people had a dream, right, or like a vision
Right.
that a witch came to them in their dreams or in a vision,
The spectral thing.
and so yeah, that's spectral evidence.
Yeah.
So it was like wasn't even a real thing.
Right.
Couldn't technically be proven. People just said, "Oh, I saw this in a dream," or "I saw this in a vision."
Right.
It's so and so. She's a witch.
Right.
And they're like, okay.
Sure. Yeah.
So I was kind of wanting to explain a little bit about what bewitching meant. 'Cause
Yeah.
we hadn't really talked about that. I didn't think we'd talked about that much.
Right. Okay. So bewitching would mean, so some people would say it was a manifestation, like they couldn't control their bodies anymore. They were feeling someone pinching them or prickling them with needles or something like that. And then
But it's
barking like
always
dogs or
something that's done to them.
right. And then other times they said they saw an apparition, a specter of somebody, or in their dream or in person, or yeah,
That was trying to harm them.
that was trying to harm
it's-
them somehow.
yeah.
Or they were scaring them, or they were seeing them perform like witching ceremonies or something. It was really out there. All right, our next point is intolerance. The infighting of this community shows the inflexible nature of the individuals of this village and church. They had trouble agreeing on so many things that were really not that big of a deal. And we also see intolerance of people who are poor, sick, of a different background or religious views. So intolerance, yeah. Our next point, targeting of marginalized people, people without power. So we kind of already highlighted on that. Slaves, women, poor people, sick people, the weak, the people who were unliked in the town. The if you look at the breakdown of the victims, 70% of those executed were women and 30% were men. So there's a clear disparity there, but still both genders were targeted. And we learned also that 2 dogs were killed, which is really sad.
It's awful.
Yeah. Okay, and then we have just the possibility of this being revenge. That somehow it was part of this Putnam Porter feud. And yeah, that's really sad.
And people just call them out because they had other beef with them.
Yeah. And then we have a lack of accountability of those in power. Members of the we read also that members of the jury that were part of these trials were usually family members of those of the accusing people. So the people accusing other people of witchcraft, their family members were sitting on those juries.
Nice.
Also, the judge, several of the judges would receive strongly worded letters from other people outside of the community telling them not to use spectral evidence. So that whole like seeing ghost thing, they were like, whatever you do, don't do that. And they didn't listen to that. Yeah, so there were, and nobody really did anything until the governor finally stepped in. And then some people say the only reason he really stepped in was because his wife was accused of witchcraft. So when it became personal
he's
for
like, oh, this has gone too far. We better stop.
Yeah, exactly. Like it became personal for him. He's like, oh, we can't do this anymore. Then another point we had was the unjust justice system. The court was more interested in confessions of guilt, we learned, rather than proof of someone's innocence. And we also learned that the jury pools were biased and the accused had no defense or lawyer. And then we even saw that judges randomly changed verdicts on a whim. Then we have this was just mine. I just put just bad people. Bad people. So I talked about this. So Judge Jonathan Corwin, according to multiple sources, said he did not leave any written apology or make any statement showing his regret or remorse in the proceedings of the Salem Witch Trials. So there's literally no evidence that he in any way was remorseful for his actions for causing the death of 20 people. Like, it's just like,
Yeah. But
wow.
they were beheaded, right? Like they were
hanged.
typically.
They were hanged.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. In
Sorry.
Europe, they were burned usually, but in this case, one person was crushed to death.
Talking about horrific deaths here.
Yeah. That was shocking to me.
Based upon some hearsay, I mean.
Right. And then the other thing, just bad people. So during this time of the witch trials, we also know that Reverend Samuel Parris was giving sermons that were adding to the hysteria and promoting unfounded suspicion of even upstanding members of his own church, like Rebecca Nurse. So you have this pastor who's literally just pouring gasoline on this whole thing. It's just like, wow. We did learn that the Reverend does later apologize, but innocent members of his own church were executed, and he didn't do anything to stop it. It's just like, wow.
And he was the one that was not remorseful, or were you talking?
No, that was that was one of the judges who was not. No, this guy apologized. He did apologize. And then I learned that he moved away. His wife died not that long after all of this, and then he moved away.
Was she a witch?
Apparently, no. She was. I don't think she was a witch. But something else it really struck me in this story as well. We're dealing with these highly religious people, but there's so many like striking levels of hypocrisy that are in this story. Like even just Samuel Parris, like he has this slave. One, he has a slave. Two, when she's like leaving jail and everyone's being exonerated, he's like, "You're on your own. I'm going to sell you to somebody else." Basically. Yeah. I'm like, ugh, barf. Okay, and then the last thing, the other point was just dehumanization. That people were being scapegoated. That people, these are people that, it's like your neighbors. It'd be like people you know intimately. You see them every day. These are small communities. It's not like St. Louis or Seattle. Like we have 500 people, maybe. I mean, these aren't huge towns, and they're turning their own neighbors in, they're believing that they are witches, literally, and they are watching them be hanged. And then they're not only turning them in, but they're going through this whole charade of how these people have bewitched them. It's just like, wow.
It's hard to imagine the kind of like hatred that you would want that. You would want the death of someone.
Right.
I guess it's just fear in this case.
Right.
It sounds like.
Yeah.
More than anything else.
Yeah. All right. I have a quote from a book, The Societal History of Crime and Punishment in America, written by Wilbur R. Miller. He says, a number of historians have speculated as to why the witch hunts occurred and why certain people were singled out. These proposed reasons have included personal vendettas, fear of strong women, and economic competition. Regardless, the Salem Witch Trials are a memorial and a warning to what hysteria, religious intolerance, and ignorance can cause in the criminal justice system. Yeah, so that's basically the story that was all we were going to say about Salem Witch Trials. I was going to say, though, that last point, the dehumanization point, I wanted to bring up our current political climate because that is what is happening right now. Like, it's just plain as day. There was recently a Trump rally at Madison Square Gardens, and the level of racism on display, like the fact that these people were invited by the Trump campaign, and the level of stuff that they spewed out there was just striking. The first act was supposedly a comedian, quote unquote, calling Puerto Rico a floating pile of garbage or something like that. And then they called Kamala Harris the Antichrist. Somebody said that about her. That the people who support her are, I forget, they use a very, very harsh term. But basically, they are dehumanizing a huge chunk of American society. And they're saying these people are trash. These people are dangerous. These people are the Antichrist. They use some really foul language. I think they called him a bleeping something. I forget. Yeah, it was an effing something. I don't know what it was, but it was like really like shocking language at a Trump rally. And what's shocking to me even more so, and brings us to like the religious component, is that I want to say that the ratio of evangelical Christians that supported Donald Trump in 2016 was like 8-1. And I think it's similar now. And so we have somebody who's inviting people who are race baiting, who are, using profanities, who are dehumanizing other people. And that's who Christians want. We want that. What that guy is selling, we want that. Yeah. And so the irony also is that, so their standard bearer, Donald Trump, constantly says that he is under the attack of a witch hunt. So it pairs into the Salem witch hunts as well. But that's not true. There's not a witch hunt. And if we look at him, his standing, so he is a man of power. He's been the president of the United States. He has a vast following. He has vast wealth. He's the embodiment of the part of society that had the most power historically in the United States, a white male, a white Christian male, supposedly Christian. I'm using that loosely. And he's saying, without evidence, that because he is being held accountable by anybody, that it is a witch hunt.
That's the go-to.
Yeah. And so it's sad to me that, this is very common, that people who are accused of something say, oh, this is just a witch hunt, but it's sad because it's not. Because
there were real innocent people.
Yeah. Like, this was a real story, and real people died.
During the Salem Witch Trials.
Yeah.
An actual witch hunt.
Right.
where people were innocent and being hanged.
Right. And we know that it's difficult to be convicted of something in the United States because you're innocent until proven guilty. And there's a lot of laws and a lot of regulations. And Donald Trump has been convicted. I mean, he is a felon. He has been found liable for sexual abuse. And on top of that, we all have ears. We know the type of person he is. And yet he claims to be a good person. This was something he said at the rally. I'm just a good person who's trying to clean up our country. And I'm just like, what's happening? What's happening? Yeah. So what we're going to do now, and Cara, so I ended up writing a poem for this Halloween special, and I called it The Tale of Ronald Frump. Go ahead, Cara.
I feel like this was another one of your episodes. I feel like I've barely said anything.
I think it's just because you're sleepy.
That's not why. That's not fully why.
It's
For
not?
sure.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
I am sleepy.
Yeah. So I decided to write this poem, and it's kind of, one of my friends says it was very intense, and I think it is. But I filmed it on our back porch. I had a fire going, and I utilized flashlights to help with creating ambiance. So I went old school. I went to Lowe's and I bought this like yellow, old, like clunky, flashlight.
Whoa.
So I could do that. And then I even bought a flashlight that has a red light. So it looked really creepy. Yeah. Anyway, what we're going to do is I'm going to play that next. I'm going to, not on this recording, I'm going to attach it to this recording and put it together for the podcast. But it's called The Tale of Ronald Frump. And you can probably decide who that's about. But I made it scary because I made it true, unfortunately. But it's part of our Halloween special. So we'll say goodbye now. But we hope that you'll join us for our next episode. And thank you so much. We really appreciate you. The Tale of Ronald Frump. There once was a man named Ronald Frump who was mean to most people. A really big grump. More than a grump, more than a pest. Actually a danger. Someone who scares more than makes you stressed. He huffs and puffs and spews out trash and hate. His rants are outrageous, false, but a call to the worst, a bait. Remember kids in cages and bleach in your veins? Nuking hurricanes, shooting protesters, his wishes when he took the reins. A friend to Putin, Orban and Xi, a dictator on day one, a promised decree. The people he likes are those who cower, who appease, acquiesce, drift along, despite even having power. But there was a group he despised more than the rest. He saved for them his vitriolic best. He called them nasty, horse-faced, crazy and slobs, fat pig, lowlife, bimbo and dogs, Miss Piggy, Miss Housekeeping, low IQ and lazy, bitch, slow. Let's remember and make sure our memory is not easy. He grabs them by the pussy. He fires them at will. They are disposable, forgettable, just meant for his thrill. This group is all women, young and old, from all walks of life, soft-spoken and bold. We are a threat to his fragile ego because we are the ones with the power to say no. No to the race baiting, no to the hate, no to the division, the lies, the gaslighting, the presidential debate. Together, we can set the stage for something better. With our vote, our voice, elect a woman, a record setter. We might be scared or trembling with anger, but remember, we hold the power to vote to thank her. Thank her for standing up for all of us, women pushed aside or thrown under the bus. Vote to honor your daughter, your sister, your mother, your coworker, your friend, anyone who is an other. The tale of Frump, a felon, a sexual abuser, is still being written. Let's make him a loser. Let's elect the first woman president to end his tale clearly and with precedent. Go vote. Happy Halloween!